Okay, welcome everybody. This is session 3 of the MuleSoft Certified Developer Exam Prep. So glad to have you here with us. And in session 2, we completed with the importance of having your Mule applications structured. We reviewed all of this, so you can check that out in the previous video. They're going to be labeled sessions 1 through 6. Unless there's some change of adding additional sessions, I'm not sure. But at any rate, this is where we left off in that session. And now we're going forward into the next objective that is deploying and managing your APIs and integrations. So in a previous recording, we talked about the lifecycle of the API. And this is where we're at the iteration where our Mule application has been tested, good to go, and now we're ready to deploy it to a runtime. Now that runtime can be CloudHub, Runtime Fabric, or hybrid. So going to bring this over a little bit busy. True is a little bit busy, but hey, this is the ability of what MuleSoft brings to the table in that there are many options for deployment here. See if I can bring this up just a little bit better. I almost need a halfway here. All right, let's see if this will work. I'm trying to get it to like 45, but anyway. It wants to jump there. This probably will work. I just want to be able to give you visibility enough. Can you see that pretty good?
Yeah, that's looking good on my screen.
Okay. All right. So what we have is the different runtime options. Now for the MCD one, you do not have to be a total expert in all of this. You just need to understand what the runtime is and what the options are. Beyond that, it's not as detailed as the architect exams. So above all, we want to notice that this is the anypoint.mulesoft.com control plane. So you'll hear us often talking about the control plane versus the runtime plane. And the control plane is where we interact with anypoint.mulesoft.com. So that is at the hub. And one platform account can and does support multiple deployment types. On one of the projects I was on, we started off with CloudHub 1. Okay. So we deployed the apps in a VPC, a virtual private cloud, in CloudHub 1. And what ended up happening is then CloudHub 2 became available, and we started talking about, and making arrangements to migrate over to CloudHub 2 so that they would be on the newest version. And so it is a total redeployment of any of your apps in CloudHub 1. The apps don't have to be totally rewritten, but there are a few changes in CloudHub 2 that do impact the way a flow behaves, especially when it comes to the VM queues not being persistent. Okay, CloudHub 1, you can set them to be persistent. And in CloudHub 2, even if in a Mule app you have it set to persistent, it will not be persistent. So what that means, essentially, if the app goes down, your messages in a VM queue are lost. Okay, so pretty important if you think about it. But anyway, so we migrated and the platform supported both of this. And so we can see in our platform account that if we go to Runtime Manager, that there are different deployment options when we're deploying an app. Okay, we have a target here, deployment target. And so we have the shared spaces for CloudHub 2, and we have hybrid, which is where our servers would be. And if we had set up runtime fabrics, it would also be listed here. Now, what's not listed here is CloudHub 1 because this is a newer platform account and they're not offering CloudHub 1 by default anymore. But there are a lot of companies still on CloudHub 1, and I do have another account that can show that, but you pretty much understand that a single Anypoint platform account manages the deployments in the Mule runtime to all of these environments by choosing where you want your target. In a pipeline, you would configure that pipeline to manage the different target locations. So again, in that one case that I was using as an example, we started off in CloudHub 1, we started migrating over to CloudHub 2, and then another division wanted to test out and do proof of concepts in a customer hosted server environment. And what that means is they spun up servers and installed the runtime on that server and then deployed the applications inside that server. So it is a full supportive, let me zoom in on that just a second. When we do that and we have a standalone server, there's a video out there you can go check out in the Bits and Bytes series that shows you how to set up a server. You can set it up on your own system. But, professionally, we spin up a virtual machine or a container, or, go ahead and install the Mule runtime on that server in a particular version. And then we deploy all of our apps inside that runtime. So they're all within that same server. And that is supported. Then once you have it stood up with the Mule runtime, then you run what we call the Mule agent. And I have a cloud behind here because you could spin up these servers in Azure or, wherever AWS, wherever you want to spin up these servers. They can be based, they can be cloud-based, or they can be like in that video we did, and in some of the classes I've done, we spin up a server on our own computer. So it doesn't matter where it resides, it is a customer hosted server. Okay. And then you install this little Mule agent, and that Mule agent checks in with the runtime manager. So that's all right here under servers. Really pretty easy to do. It's not painful. So once you have a server, you click on add server, and then you put the server name, node 5, and then you use this code here. Copy the command, and you run that command on your server, and then it checks into the runtime manager like these have been checked in. And then they're not connected and they have actually expired. Because if you can use the trial account to download a server. FYI, if you want to see how this works and what this looks like. So you go to that download page, and here's where you choose Mule standalone server. It's good for 30 days if you're doing the trial account. Okay. So anyway, let me get this out of the way here. You check in the server, and then that's when the server, you can set alerts on that server. You can see the CPU usage of that server. So, all from Anypoint platform, all from the control plane. So it's pretty neat the way it all ties in. But I do want to point out something while I'm here talking about standalone server. Okay. And that is the fact that when you have your own Mule, your own servers on a standalone server as your deployment model, there is a feature that is called a Mule domain. Hang on a minute. I am doing this for a reason. Yeah, that's good. A Mule domain. Now, you will likely have questions. It is part of the objectives for this exam of what a Mule domain is. And if you took the fundamental class, self-paced or instructor-led, you're going to see maybe 1 or 2 slides dedicated to what a Mule domain is. And I know myself, when I walked that journey, that I was like, a Mule what? I had no clue. So I had to really wrap my head around what is a Mule domain. So I'm going to cover that right now so that it's pretty clear. This is coming up for part of what I want to use to explain it. So while I'm waiting for Studio to come up, let me also talk about Runtime Fabric. Again, it's going to be a customer hosted environment, and you set it up over top of Kubernetes. And again, if our account that I shared with you had Kubernetes installed, it would be an additional target option to use there, to be provided as a location. All right, now I have my good stuff over here. One second. Let me fix something here. Okay. All right. So back to the topic about the Mule domain. All right. So what is a Mule domain? First of all, let me start with what happens in every other environment except the hybrid. Okay. So all of the other environments, when we have an application like we have here, EMS, patient system API, and we've got a global XML file here, this global XML file is only going to serve this application. Okay. All of these global elements are only going to be available for any XML file that's in this particular application. And then we have another application down here. And likewise, it has a global XML file. Okay, and this global XML file is only going to be available for any of the XMLs inside of this application. They are divided out. They do not share the global configurations between the two of them. It's completely packaged. However, in a standalone server environment, you have the option to add what is called a Mule domain. And what that looks like is, let's just pretend I'm going to add a Mule domain to this one. I'm going to do new, and look, Mule, oh no, it wouldn't even be added. Hold on, let me fix that. It would be from the beginning that we would do new and do Mule domain project. Okay. And so this is how I would start with EMS, Mule domain, and it is going to go for a particular server version and click finish. And now this Mule domain is unique, and it only applies to a server environment. I can't deploy this to CloudHub. It wouldn't work. And now when I go in here to create, I don't even think it has HTTP. Yeah, we've got to add modules to it. There's additional things we have to do, manage modules. And so here I've got to add the module from Exchange, and I want to have an HTTP. So for my HTTP, I'm going to bring that over, click finish, apply and close. And now I can create an HTTP listener in my Mule domain. I'm just going to go with basic defaults, and I'm going to say, okay. And now this is, and I save it. Okay, so now what you do with this is this does get deployed when I have all of my global elements in here. So I could do my database, I could do my VM, anything I need in this global element, I could have here, okay, within this global configuration, because it's a Mule domain configuration. And when I deploy this, I would deploy it to my server. Okay, I deploy it to my server. Once it's deployed to my server, then I could go into my applications, and let me bring this up here. Should be in on that one. There we go. And I go into my preferences, and I will find, I got to think about where it is. I'll find it. I wasn't really planning on going this far in, but hey, it's all good. It's somewhere where we set it. Yeah, I will find it. It's not Studio. I really don't think it's Studio. I'd be surprised if it was. Anypoint platform. Did I find it? This is the fun part, is you get to go, where is it? Just where? Runtime? No, that's not it. It's probably somewhere in here. I'll have to look it up. Hey, we are doing this on the fly.
That's right. I didn't see her. I'd help you.
I know. There is a place that you choose the Mule domain. If you want to Google that for me, RJ, see if you can
Yeah,
find where you choose the Mule domain. Um, at any rate, there's a good place for it. I think it's under there. Um, I normally have my notes in front of me, but I don't. I'm on the fly here. So yeah, we'll find it. There is a place where you can set the domain, and you would choose that Mule domain when we do that. And so as a result of the choosing the Mule domain for that project, when that application gets deployed in the server, it becomes a member of that Mule domain. Okay, it becomes a member of it. So I know where I'd have it. But anyway,
I don't know if this is good information or not. It's saying the SRC main app folder is where it would be contained, but I don't think that it's not where you were.
I'm looking. Yeah, open Mule project properties. Yeah, that's where it is. All right,
Okay.
good, good, good. Okay, so open source main Mule flows, come down to Mule, open Mule project properties. This is good to document, by the way, folks, if you ever needed it. And now remember when we deploy an application, we've got deploy. And the first one is deploy to the domain, and it says domain default. And then the next one would show um, the application deployment. So even by me creating this EMS Mule domain up here, it's available here. And so I would apply this and tell this application, I'm not going to apply and close, that this is going to be the domain in which this particular application is going to use the global elements there. Okay. So once you select it here, then I'm not going to save it though. Then any of my global elements for that application are going to come from that EMS Mule domain. Even here in Studio, it'll start, acknowledging that it needs that, global element. So when that Mule domain, the EMS Mule domain gets deployed to the server here, then any of the applications, now one of them may not be using the EMS domain. It might be using its own default domain. That's okay. But a Mule domain allows, let's say these three guys here are sharing that Mule domain global element. And so these three are going to not even have any global elements inside of their global.xml file, except for a router inside of the API kit router. That's the only one that would be there, but all the others would use the Mule domain global elements. And this is really helpful. One of the things we, often talk about is, what if I have, changes to make to my global elements? What if I need to, make some changes here, or go to it, manage the version or whatever? Then this is a great way using a Mule domain. But it is only available on a standalone server, on your hybrid customer hosted servers. That's the only time a Mule domain applies. Okay. So like I said, this guy could be not in the domain. These three could be in it, and they would be using the global elements here. Okay. So that's about the Mule domain. I wanted to be sure to cover that because it is on the exam. I don't want you having it pop up and you go, I don't know what they're talking about. Because like I said, even in the curriculum, it's very brief. All righty. So
So to make sure my notes are, sorry to cut you off there, just to make sure my notes are right, my Mule domain is going to be where you're on a standalone server and you have these applications sharing a global XML. Is
Correct.
that a good note to take? Okay, cool.
It is.
Making
And it's
sure we got it.
actually a deployable thing. Like it
Right,
actually turns out to be an asset that you deploy. Um, and you have your, yeah, so it has its own global XML file.
right.
It's, yep,
Awesome. All
you
right,
got it.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot on that one. But again, back to the point to make here is that all of these different runtimes. Oh, one thing to point out, if you are doing a standalone server and this version on this server is a 0.4, 0.8, whatever, that is where when we talk about if you are deploying to your own server and you need to know what your server version is because you want to develop your project to match that server. Okay. So that's where if it's a 4.7 or whatever, because you don't necessarily change, sometimes the runtime version doesn't get updated as fast as CloudHub does. Because CloudHub updates it, MuleSoft updates the cloud versions on the fly. And and for the most part they are backwards compatible, like the next version won't mess you up. Now if there's something they are changing, they'll let you know. But anyway, if you're running your own servers, then you need to develop your application with the version that your servers are running, or you could have some hiccups. So that's where it's important to know, because this entire environment here is running on one particular version, whatever this is. Okay, so we could say the Mule runtime is, no, the Mule runtime is running, let's say 4.7 point something. I don't know, 4.7.0. Let's just do that. So then all of your Mule apps you might have to install a new, that version of the runtime, so that it runs correctly, for you. But all of these apps, they're all dedicated to that particular version that it's running there. Okay. CloudHub's going to change their versions and is usually backwards compatible anyway. But inside your little replica that we're deploying is a little teeny tiny, well, I should say, a nice small footprint of a Mule runtime inside there with your Mule app. So it's not a huge, big Mule runtime in CloudHub. It's actually inside your container of your replica. And it's the same thing over here in a worker. The worker over here has also a runtime and the Mule app, as you can see there. It's just in an EC2 instance. So it's a little different of the protocol that it uses over top of it, but both of them are containerized. Okay. So having said that, there's one more deployment model. This is more for the architects in the room. And this one is the one that I always joke around in class saying you can be on a private island, you can be on a cruise ship that has no internet, you can be isolated wherever. And you can set up your own environment. The black border around this means that it's in your own network. It's called Private Cloud Edition. It does not traverse over any public internet at all. It's completely contained. And so what you would do is you would have your own customer hosted servers, could set up a domain as we see down here, and have your servers running on your own system. So imagine yourself in either your own data center, or however you want to isolate this, where you have your own area. And then the way the anypoint.mulesoft.com works is that is your control plane. Okay. So the servers are set up the same way I just described it, but for the one second, for the control plane, the anypoint.mulesoft.com is going to be that we would spin up containers That's the first thing we would do. We'd spin up containers, and then we would install a couple of different APIs from our Anypoint platform APIs. Again, it's not so much at all on the MCD1, but just for your understanding, the Anypoint platform APIs are a unique group of APIs. And so they are functionality of APIs that work under the graphical interface of what we are doing when we are using Anypoint platform. Okay, when we're using Anypoint platform and we go from, where is my Anypoint platform? Boy, I'm losing my stuff this morning. Hang on. There we go. There it is. When we go to Anypoint platform, and even in this case, let's go to maybe access management. Okay. And so I can see I've got my access management. Notice I'm going to account users at the top up here. That's my URL. So access management API. Hey, so the deal is that MuleSoft uses APIs. You know, we have APIs that we use. That's what's under the hood. This is just my interface, my graphical interface. It just bounced me to this API. So all in through here, whatever the endpoints are, let me go to the API reference. This is going to show you all of the different endpoints that are available. And they're going to be things that we recognize, like, you know, setting up a new user, setting up a business group, permissions, teams, environments, orgs, etc. You can go through that. And these, so if I wanted this feature of Anypoint platform to be part of my environment here on my private island, I would install that API in a container. I would also install the runtime manager and the API manager because I want those also. Okay, so API managers here somewhere. I probably am looking. There's CloudHub. That one you could not install there. So you're limited to certain APIs that you can install. I probably went by it, but it's probably here somewhere. API manager. There it is. So access management would be a good one, API manager, and then runtime manager is also another one. And the runtime manager would just be managing, deploying to your own servers. So essentially you would have your own anypoint.mulesoft.com. It would look a lot like that, the interface, but you'd be working off of the actual APIs behind the scenes. So that's how it works, private cloud edition. And so when it comes to our different options of deployment, how it works, it's very versatile in what we do, and high level understanding of that in the MCD1 is important just to get the bigger features. But those of you that my target audience for this whole series are those of you coming on board or retaking your certification for projects. And so we're going to have clients that use different environments. So anyway, Runtime Manager allows us to deploy our applications into one of those environments and all the other features that are there, including properties that we can add to a deployment and our logs. And, you know, so I know you're familiar with a lot of that. Just look around really well in Runtime Manager to be comfortable with any questions that would be associated with that. And along those lines would be to, you know, just grab one of the applications you have deployed, and you can see logs are over here for any activities that occurred. You know, so in regards to that, just be familiar with some of the things that are available. Where we talk about overriding properties, that's going to be in this area here where we can change values here for the properties and be able to have also additional monitoring here to change your log levels that are showing. Okay. Again, for this exam, you don't have to be too deep into all of that. Just understand what is there and how it works. Okay. And then API management. All right. So API management is where we manage and secure our APIs. And this is where we have the ability, when we first deploy our applications, and some of you who've been in my classes might remember this, is that we are, our applications are running and they're totally unsecured. They're just out there and not having any kind of authentication added to them at all. And so they're wide open. So we need to manage them. So by managing them, we go to API Manager. There's two different types of enforcement that we can add. And in the two different types of enforcement, and mostly you're going to be centered around the Mule gateway setup. So I know there is the Flex gateway. It is not, it's a great feature for sure. Going to be doing some videos on that. But in our case, we're going to be using the Mule gateway that is embedded in the Mule runtime. Okay, so it's part of the Mule runtime. The focus I want to have here next is on the proxy type. There's two different types of enforcement that we can use of the proxy type. We can either use the basic endpoint or the proxy application. In all of the courses, you use the proxy, or I should say the fundamental course, you use the proxy application. And I've got documentation and some videos coming forward for you on, well, they're already there, on the different types and how to do both types. Okay. So the proxy application, just as an overview, if you choose the proxy application, then you will see that now it's saying, what is your target type? Where do you want to deploy this application? Because it is a separate application. Your proxy will live in a separate application. And so what that means, let me grab proxy versus embedded here. Another diagram to kind of bring this home, is that there's two types, proxy, embedded. Now what the proxy does when you choose proxy, and there are some reasons you would want to do a proxy app, but one of those reasons is that it's going to be standing in front of a non-Mule app. Okay, you can choose a non-Mule app for it to, like maybe you have a app running in another organization, or you have another app running that's a different protocol even than MuleSoft. It doesn't have to be MuleSoft. It can be any kind of additional URL that's out there. So you want to have a proxy in front of it so that you can secure it. And also, once it's managed by API Manager, this gives us the ability to see when it's failing, see when it is having issues. So it gives us a window into what's happening with this API, as well as governing it, as well as securing it. So a proxy app, again, is going to be a separate application that when a client sends in a request, they're going to have to meet whatever the policies are for this app that are in the policy folder. Now, the policy folder is in that proxy app. And once they authenticate, they can go right into either a Mule app. In our case, that's what we use, or a totally non-Mule app. Okay. So this app, when you are doing the configuration for a proxy, you must already have a URL. Okay. You've got to already have that established. So off the bat, it says deploy a proxy app. Where do you want to deploy it? Are you hybrid? Which server? Are you Runtime Fabric? We don't have one set up. It's not going to show. But where are you deploying this to? Okay, so we're just going to, for right now, choose CloudHub 2. And then it talks about the runtime version. Notice the runtime version here is 4.9.3 on our servers. If we were doing that, remember, we kind of pretended that that would be, a different version, but here we can choose our servers. So again, the versioning matters there. And then we are going to give it a name. Okay. Name of proxy. I'm just putting something in there for now, so it is happy with me. All right, so whatever the name of the proxy is, and then we'll go to next. It doesn't like camel case. So sorry. Let me fix you. All right, next. Okay, so now it's saying, all right, what API? So you have to have established an API that you're going to be managing, obviously. And let me just use something here because I'm not going to complete this out. I'll just go with that one. And so it has to be an API that you've already been through the life cycle of that API, your specification, publishing it to Exchange. Got to have that. All right, and then we go to next. So now notice that, what's here is being populated in based on just basic default configurations. And so everything's good here. We'll go to the next page. Now notice this URL here is required. And that's what I'm talking about, is you must have a URL to do the proxy app. Okay. You must have a URL. It can be, anything. HTTPS / / I don't think this is going to work, but we can pretend google.com. Okay. Whatever that other app is, that's not going to work. But anyway, and if I go to next, now it's just going to be a summary. I'm not going to complete this, but I'm just showing you that what this process is that you have to go through if you're doing a proxy app. Okay. So I'm going to cancel this whole party here. Yeah, discard. Okay. So once you have created a proxy app, then we can slip over to Runtime Manager and see that it has deployed as its own proxy. Okay. So we see the proxy here. And that's from the fundamental class. This is a proxy. Okay. And it is a regular app. It's like a regular application that is, running out there. If we go to our logs, we're going to see the behavior and anything that's happened with this app. Okay. We can do diagnostics on it. You can run a thread dump. So there's various things we can do because it is its own app. It's its own app. And it points to the system API that it's associated with, just like that structure I showed you. So in the configuration of this one, going back to API Manager, if we look at the configuration of this, we will see that the implementation is associated with this proxy app. So there is that structure. And if you come up to actions in the upper right and you view configuration details, it's going to show you that relationship. Okay. It's going to say this endpoint actually sits in front of this app. Okay. So that's your web service you created that is in the runtime also. And so this proxy is in front of it. Everything else beyond that is going to be the same, regardless as to whether it's a proxy or a basic endpoint. Now, even in the proxy kind of configuration, the API instance ID is auto-generated. Okay, and that's how the runtime knows where, how to add a policy. If we were to add a policy right now to this, another policy, and we chose it and we said, apply a policy, in the logs of that proxy, you would see that API ID. You would see that API ID. And so that API ID is how it knows to auto discover your proxy. And so in here, you will see the API ID mentioned a lot. Okay, see it? There it is there. And somewhere here we had where we applied the client ID and clients, the policy to it. The words will come. It's early in the morning here, not terribly early though, but I'm waking up. But anyway, you will see that that policy was added. It's going to be somewhere in here. There it is, rate limiting SLA. I had the SLA part out. But anyway, there's the rate limiting SLA. And then here is the API ID. So it always uses that API ID as an identifier within the Mule runtime to locate the correct application to add it to. So there it was added right there. All right. So when it comes to managing our APIs, now the other basic endpoint path is different. It's totally different. So let's go to add an API again, add a new API and a Mule gateway. And this time we're going to say connect to an existing application basic endpoint. And in this case, I do not have to have an application that's already running, okay, to do this managed API part. Actually, you do this in most cases before the app is deployed. Okay, so we'll click on next. We do have to have an API in which we're going to be managing. Okay, so we have to have it associated with an API. And then we'll go to next. And this again is, we're going to bypass this for now. We're not going to use that. And then we have the upstream URL, but this is not required. Look, this is optional. Okay, it's optional. And so what happens here is I'm not going to provide that URL for my app yet. I may not even know what that URL is going to be, but I want to set up a managed API. So when I do, and this time I am going to go ahead and go through the process. I'll delete it later. Once I do and I click save, it creates for me a managed API for the particular API that I chose. I chose the test IDP. Okay. And what I have here now is an API instance ID. And this API instance ID is what I need to use in my application to configure this to be deployed and associated with that managed API. Okay. So now I'm going to pretend that I'm going to associate this app with that managed API. And so I will come in here and first of all, in my global XML, I need to add the auto discovery global element. And I have to choose, here it's a property placeholder. Okay, I chose to use a property placeholder here. You could put the actual ID. Okay, you can put the actual ID if you want to. That number we saw, but really it's better to use the property placeholders. And then you choose the flow name and you want to choose the main, in this case, this is using the API kit router. So I want to use the main flow off of that. Okay. And then in addition, we would need to add in the config.yaml file API ID, that value. And even here, sometimes in the past, we've used even a fake number just to get the app deployed. That's one option you can do, or you can put the actual value here again. Or when we deploy that app, we can add, find Runtime Manager, we can add that property placeholder here. Oh, look, it's already showing it. It has client ID and client secret. So I could do API.id and then that value. I don't know if I have it in my clipboard. No, I don't. Let's just say whatever that value was. Okay. And so I would add the value of that API ID here and redeploy it. And then it will handshake and auto discover. That's what auto discovery is. It will auto discover the relationship with this API and it will come up as a active status. It'll green up. Okay. So that's the process between a embedded or basic endpoint over here. We don't do that in the fundamental class. Then what happens is that policy folder for enforcement is actually part of this Mule app, but it has to be a Mule app in this case. Okay, so the process is a little different. In this case, you would have you have to have an existing URL of a running app, Mule or non. Create a proxy app. It's its own application. You add your policies. This one, you do not, in most cases, don't even have the app URL. You manage an API, and then you do the auto discovery portion by adding the global configuration for the XML, auto discovery, as well as your value, or at least even a fake value that you override in your pipeline or override when you are actually manually deploying it in the Mule runtime. I mean, from Runtime Manager. Okay. So those are all parts of the way that the the way that you would do the basic endpoint is also referred to as embedded. Now, what are the benefits? Okay. Why would you use one or the other? When you're using the embedded, that means that this URL is going to be readily available for everyone to use, which is fine in most cases. And that way they have to adhere to whatever the policies are that you apply to it. And, you know, the other, you know, the benefit of this would be also is that, you know, if you are being charged based on vCores, this would be based on the amount of vCore you need for this app to run. Let's say it's a 0.2. Okay. So your vCore usage in this case is not going to go up as a result of having your policies embedded here, unless it's a big, if that policy is like maybe a caching policy, and caching is where we would, you know, retain and store data to speed up the next request that comes in. What if it's a very large cache? And what if there were some, you know, problems associated with that? You'd have to increase your vCore amount on this app. That is why some people do, in that case of a large cache, do prefer to go with the proxy app, because the proxy app by default is going to automatically be a 0.1 anyway. Well, you might could go with a 0.2, but I think it automatically defaults to 0.1. And what that means is even if it's not going to be having a lot of traffic, or, you know, a lot of memory needs, it's still going to have some kind of, you know, sizing and usage of your vCores here, so that it will have something to run when it's in Runtime Manager, you know, in the when it's in CloudHub. So it will have some usage of the vCores. And then you have your app. Might be a Mule app, might not be. But if it is a Mule app and you have 100 Mule apps, and you are just by your standard thinking that you have to put all of them in a configuration of a proxy app for each one, then 100 Mule apps plus 100 proxy apps is going to be 200 apps out there. And that's just not a, you know, wise use of a lot of your vCores if you're being charged by vCores. Now, there is a new model out there. Some of you may know this. There's a new model that's based on consumption that doesn't track per vCore. So it may not matter. So again, it's going to, there's a lot of things at play. And architecturally, there's a lot of other things at play that I'm not even going into. But for your sake, for your level of the exam, understand that you don't have to memorize step by step what your processes are between the proxy and the basic endpoint. That is more for those of you that are going to be hands-on projects, but do understand the differences between them, and that this could be a non-Mule app. Any questions on that?
No, that's making good sense. I like that you can pick one to fit your needs. If you don't know where your URL is going to be, whatever, then you go with basic endpoint and embedded. If you have everything set up, you go with your proxy application. I feel like we did that in the MCIA class a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Am I remembering that right? Okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah, especially the proxy. You do the
Yeah.
proxy. We don't do the embedded. And that's unfortunate because, honestly, I came out of class spanky ready to go thinking I had, okay, here we're going to go show up on my first contract and I'm ready to do a proxy app. And they're like, no, we're going to do embedded. And I'm like, whoops.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. So I had to it wasn't in the curriculum. It should be. It is in our private classes. We do it in our private
Mm-hmm.
classes. I do both. And so that exposure, is good. So
Very good.
yeah. And then beyond that, all of the policies for enforcement are the same. Nothing changes as far as what you start with. Let me clean this up really quick here. So to delete one, I'm going to delete that guy. Just come out here and click delete the instance, and it's gone. Beyond that, what we have on our policies are out of the box policies that are available for us to use. We've got them in several categories of securing our APIs based on either an IP allow list, and that means, I would identify certain IP ranges that are permissible. IP block list, if I know of certain bad character IPs, I could add that. It's a little harder to control some of that because you don't know where the bad characters are going to always be coming from, but you can set some limits there. JWT validation, you do want to be familiar enough with what this is. Basically, it's a JSON web token that allows you to authenticate at one point, and then it follows you all the way in through your other requests. It's kind of as a token that comes with you, very similar to OAuth in some ways with that bearer token. So there's a couple different options for security here. JSON thread and XML thread, that means the body that's being sent in is identified. There is a way that you can check it for any malicious code coming in and reject it if it doesn't appear right to you. And there's ways of configuring that. And then we have basic authentication. This is kind of like client username and password. It's just a very basic, simple one. There's a simple version, and then there's LDAP. LDAP is intended to be on a particular server. It's a protocol to be used to manage users on their own system. So that is for a customer hosted server. This one is username and password that can be used on Anypoint platform, but this would have to be a given server. All right, then coming down the line here, detokenization and tokenization. This is for Runtime Fabric only. So you probably won't see much about this. You would if you're taking an architect exam, but you won't see much about this in regards to MCD1, other than the fact that the tokenization and detokenization is only for Runtime Fabric, and it will tokenize data like a credit card information. You can tokenize it so where it's obscured, and then detokenize it to use it or stuff like that. So these are features that are all part of Runtime Fabric only. Quality of service. Now this is the one we used in the class, this rate limiting and SLA based, meaning that we are combining client ID enforcement with a rate limiting. We limit the number of requests, and we also require client ID and client secret. So it's kind of a bundle of the two in a way. And so we can see how that works. And then these other spike control, that controls the number of traffic, requests coming in. And if it exceeds a threshold, of whatever we set, like if it's, I don't know, 100 requests per minute or something like that, if it exceeds that, you can queue additional requests. Okay, but if your queue gets full, and you can set the queue, if your queue gets full, then it will reject the requests at that point. And again, it's not something you have to know a lot about. I'm just going over them for the sake of understanding what they are for you. So spike control, rate limiting is, saying X amount of requests for a given time period. And caching allows us to cache values of a request. I send in a request. I want to get, maybe the list of the transport companies, and it doesn't change much. So I want to cache that. I want to save that request somewhere. So that the next request that comes in and asks for it just provides back that data because it didn't change. So that's what caching is. Compliance, again, cross-origin resource sharing. What that means essentially is if you're going to jump over from one domain to another, there's some details there you can learn about more too. And I don't mean the Mule domain. It's a little different as far as that's concerned. It's really more about the JavaScript, XML requests and, things like that. It's a little deeper. I don't think I personally have not ever used that one, but, I'm sure it is used. Transformation, there's headers, some values are saved in the header. And so you can inject or remove some header values there, and troubleshooting for logging, using logging. Now, these are all of the out-of-the-box policies, and these out-of-the-box policies are ready to go on day one on using the platform. But if there's something unique that you have to create, there is a way to create a custom policy. Now, you won't get into this in this course, for your exam, but it is good to know that you can create a custom policy. It's a two-part. You name it whatever you want to name it. There is a YAML file that's the parameters, and then there's an XML file that's the policy details, and you would have to configure those and have them ready to go. And once you do configure this, you publish it to Exchange as a policy type asset. Okay, so it would be out there as well. And let's see what else. So once we had the policies and we had the policies added, either kind of enforcement that you had, or they're all going to behave the same, and then they're going to be listed here. You can have multiple policies listed. You can change the order of the policies and move them around so that you have different, you can add them in the order in which you want them to be enforced. So all of those policies will be listed here. And we also have automated policies as well. And that allows you to add policies to groups of APIs, types of APIs. And when you manage an API, it'll automatically be added, and you'll see it in that area where I was just at. That automate, there's none added to this one, but that's where it would be. Okay. So I'm sure there's things I'm leaving out, but it kind of gives you an overall understanding of things. And with the policies, depending on what the policy is that you chose, you're going to have different configurations. Some of them will have that snippet code that we used and added to our design API specification snippet. Okay, so this one has a snippet. The OAuth has a snippet. There's a few of them that have snippets that you add to the specification code. Okay, and you saw that we added that. And that's kind of it with this particular objective. Any questions?
No, that's making sense.
All righty. Let's see what we have next. Mule events. All right. So next objective, 10%, folks, 10%. You're going to have to watch this one, and it's going to show up in a couple of different other objectives. And I say that because the Mule event can be impacted. Sorry, just got to fix this. The Mule event can be impacted by different processors. For example, we have a piece that we're working on that should be ready that talks about the attributes that you send in, the request attributes, or I should say the query parameters and the URI parameters, and they come in as attributes, right? So those all come in as an attribute, and on a GET request. So it comes in and comes into our flow. Well, what do we do with those attributes? We need to, like, if you're sending in, important data in those attributes, we need to do something with them. And so the idea behind it is to get those attributes and save them in a place that is going to retain. Okay. And that will be our variables. So we take and we grab the query parameter, URI parameter, whatever it is that we are sending in on that request, and we want to save it as a variable. So as we go further with our application, we are able to capture the variables. Okay, or hold on, I'll get there. It is where we're able to capture the attributes, okay, that are in the Mule event. So essentially, let me make sure I cover this, is that when a request comes in, the very first thing that happens is it hits, or I should say, it invokes this HTTP listener. So if this app is up and running and I send in a request to hello, localhost, a GET request to the path hello, this listener is invoked. Well, the HTTP listener has a structured set of attributes that are just, by default. And those attributes are going to be usable for us in some way. So as we are looking at the different attributes, we have the opportunity to use those values. As you see, it's coming. There we go. In this is capturing some of those attributes in our log. So we've got like a request path, we've got the method, and down below you can see if we had sent in query parameters and URI parameters, there would be values there. We've got a video coming out that goes into that in great detail with documentation of really even how to create this flow. So if you haven't done what I have found, what drove this whole recording that we're working on and it's being documented, is that I have found that many students that are coming into, sitting for the exam or even working, is that there's a lot of confusion around the query parameters and the URI parameters. So this whole process is to clear it up and to talk about the importance of retaining your attributes. And you'll see in that video, if you don't know this already, so those of you watching this, and we'll link you to that other video, you'll see that the attributes, we run it in debug mode and these attributes are available, and until you cross what we call a transport boundary. So that's why I say there are times that we have attributes available all day long. But if you go to a database, or if you go to a VM queue, or go to another endpoint altogether, another connector, those attributes that you had at the beginning are no longer there. You lose those attributes. And so we want to have ways of retaining that, so we would use the variables. Okay, now the variables will be available for the entire app. Okay, and so you have that ability to use them. So the other part too is our payload. On a GET request, the payload is empty until we do something with it. So we might want to be, adding some values to the payload. We might be using the transform message to create a value that would end up being in the payload. So we'll do a segment also on data weave, but the payload is going to be, added and modified throughout the flow as this is, progressing forward, because we might use our variables to build out a value in our payload, that type of thing. And then also too, there are two opportunities to identify what a value is in your variable, okay, or in your payload. So sometimes what we do is, in testing especially, or in the development part, you can use your logger to give you visibility into a value of what's in your payload. Okay. or your variables. So there's different ways you can use loggers. See, years ago, we didn't really have the ability to do debugging as easily as we can now in Studio. Okay, Studio, the debugging feature is great. You can step through each processor one at a time and see exactly what your values of your variables are, your payload, your attributes, all of that in one time, in all one session as you're debugging and going through that process. And that's great. But years ago, we didn't have that. And so I'd like to say that I certainly was the logger queen, because the logger gives you a window into what's happening at different points of your application. And I still endorse that strongly. So if I really, wanted to add a logger at different points of this flow, I could, add them in different points. And then in my console would have the results of where that application, showing me certain values along the way and where it was, giving that visibility. So that's during runtime, as an application is actually running, and even running in dev test prod. Okay, now you don't want to have sensitive data in those other environments, but you do want to have, your correlation ID or some kind of identifier of where that particular, what was happening at that point in the flow. So like, let's say I deployed this to production. And I wanted to add additional loggers saying that, this logger, well, let me put it up here. This logger, I'm going to say that this one, I just set my variables. Come on. And I could say for the message, and you can have a function, you can have it functioned on and use data weave and all that good stuff. And I'm just going to say in this one, completed setting variables. All right. I can say that. And, I can even say the flow. I can put the flow name and all that stuff. I'll add additional things. And then you can set the log level. Now, by default, it's set to info. And in CloudHub, by default, you will see info level logs. If you look at any of your applications running in Runtime Manager, you'll see that you're getting info level logs. But if this was more like a debug level, like I only want to see this if I'm debugging it, then you could set it to debug level. In which case, if this is available and running, then when I go to Runtime Manager, then what I would need to do is come in here and I have an issue and I want to see what's happened. So you could have those logs at various places throughout your application and come down to Runtime Manager and say, okay, all right, I'm having issues out here with this guy. So I need to see what the heck's going on. So I'm going to go to logs, and notice I see warnings and infos, right? Warnings and infos. So I need to change that. I want to go to settings. I want to come in here and I'm going to go to monitoring, and I'm going to change this to debug level. Okay, and then you can put the package name. You've got to put, like, I think it's com.MuleSoft something. I don't have it memorized, but there are package names that are relevant to the Mule app. There's a whole list of them. At any rate, like, for example, you could actually specify you want your detailed logs for the HTTP listener. You can set, so there's different log packages that you can do also. But at any rate, you could set the debug level, and then in your logs, you would have those debug level logs showing that you set to debug level here. Okay, so you may not want everybody to have to see that and fill your logs at the info level with, oh, you just completed setting variables. No, I want to see that when I'm debugging. Okay. And then you can also add a category here. Sometimes they recommend that you put the flow name that it occurred in and all that. And that's a nice identifier as well. So without going too deep on that, logs are your friends. Honestly, those of us who've used them for years in other, languages, because, logs have been available. Loggers have been available a long time. And that's all we had before. Whereas now, we can run in Studio and debug mode and see all of this. But for the fundamental, exam, you're basically going to have the Mule event showing or having a diagram or something like that. Come on, get out of here. That shows you the Mule event. You want to remember the entire thing is the Mule event. In the Mule message itself are your attributes and your payload. Okay, and then and remember that if you leave your flow or even go, when I say leave, I don't mean you actually leave the flow, but what I mean is one of your connectors here, like a database connector or another connector going to get your patients or whatever, is going to remove those HTTP attributes. Your attributes are going to be different. So remember that. That's going to be something relevant to the exam. And then it's called a transport boundary. If you see that term, transport boundary, that's what it is. That you lose your attributes are changed to the new boundary that it just crossed, to a database, to a VM queue, to wherever. And your payload, we have a set payload value here. We also have the transform message. And the transform message also sets your payload. Look at that. So it's setting a payload here. And you can also have some variables set here as well. There you go. So you got some variables you can set as well. So there are some different things you can do through transform message. And but that payload gets changed every step along the way depending on what you do. Like if I had a transform message there, that set payload value that I set here is going to now be changed to this payload. So anytime you do something that modifies your payload, the last thing that's done to that payload is what the listener is going to get. Okay, so this set payload just got overwritten by that transform message. Okay, so as you go through it and you see those variations of it, now you can build out a payload, like keep adding to it. You can do that, but ultimately your payload is going to be whatever it is by the end of the flow is what you're going to get in your client. Your client's going to get that, whether it's an advanced REST client or actually somebody, another system interacting with your API. I do have errors down here. Okay. So in the error category, that doesn't actually appear till some of the architect classes that suddenly they add the errors to the Mule event. Well, if an error occurs, that's part of the Mule event. Now you won't see that on the MCD one. They didn't really cover it in there, but it is. And so there is like I always like to call it like there's a flag on the play, a fault on the play where, you know, that particular request now has an error, an error, what is it called? Description and an error message associated with it. So there's an error object. And that's also managed in the Mule event. So you're getting some additional knowledge there that you don't necessarily need for this exam, but it's there. One other thing about variables, and we'll talk about this per connector because it's a big part of the exam, is that, for example, in the batch job that we do, or in a for each scope, you're going to have variables that are created outside of some of these scopes that are available inside of either a batch or a for each or parallel for each. And they're available, like if it's created before the scope, it's going to be available the entire flow. But if you have a variable that's created inside one of those scopes, it will not be available outside that scope. And that's probably the simplest way to describe that big deal, because you're going to have scenarios and they're going to ask you, you know, the value of this variable is such and such. Well, if it's created inside any of those scopes, the value of it's going to be gone if you're out of it. If it says what at the end of this flow, what is the, you know, value of the variable? Well, guess what? If it's created inside that batch job, it's not going to be available outside of it. If it's created before it, yes. Okay. And you want to run some of those so it's very clear.
I
It's very,
agree. I've thrown
yeah,
some loggers out and I can visualize what you're saying right now. That's been a huge help.
yep, yep,
Thank you for that.
yep, for sure. I'm trying to get all those pain points that, we
You,
experience.
yep,
And
you had me run through those and I can see all those little loggers sitting there and they'll catch it. Like you're saying, it's accessible if it's at the beginning, but not when it's inside the scope.
yep, yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's just it. I'm glad you pointed that out because, seeing it, hands-on with it is the biggest part that you want to do. Because I can tell you all day long what it's going to do, but when you run through those hands-on, like you say, it resonates. You get it. You can actually see it. So that's going to make your exam experience stronger and even going forward in the real world, using it. So, all right, folks, I do believe we're going to wrap here tomorrow. Let's see. So my challenge to you, I have a challenge for each of you, and that is I want you, now you can look forward at some of the other objectives that we're going to cover. We've got ahead of us, we've got error handling. We've covered some already, but ahead of us, we've got error handling and data weave are probably the two biggest ones, and batch. Okay, so we've got three. I'm going to say three. We've got error handling, data weave, and then batch and for each. That's kind of one together. So what I would like for you to do, even if you're watching this video a week from now, I don't care. That's fine. What I want you to do is send me an area that you don't know a lot about, that you're not real sure about. And what I want you to do is create a presentation for me. It doesn't have to be real lengthy, but I want you to take each of the objectives in that category. Like, okay, let me say it, maybe error handling. Error handling is probably the top one. Error handling, batch, and data weave are probably the top three ones that are challenging. And I want you to put together some kind of a presentation to tell me what you know about it, what you've learned about it, document it. And some of that would include creating flows to show it, kind of like what we were just talking about, is throwing some loggers together there, see the values of the variables as you're going through it, what's present, what's not, what happens at the end, whatever it is. You can choose any objective you want out of this exam, and I want you to tell me about it. Okay. And so next Tuesday, if you happen to have a chance to watch the video, I know several of you have conflicts during this period of time. And so I told you, you're going to have the videos. So today is Challenge Thursday to choose what you want to give a mini presentation. I don't mean an hour long. I mean, however long it takes to go over a presentation with somewhat of a demo to show how something works, whether it's error handling, data weave, whatever. And then we'll be doing those on this next coming Tuesday, which the date of that is May 5th. Okay, May 5th. And be prepared to present it. Okay. And so let me know, though, communicate with me so I know who is available that day during that time slot to give it. And if you're not available, I want you to cut a video of it. Okay. So some of you I know are in the Philippines, or we have some also that are on projects at this time. That's okay. Cut me a video. All you have to do is, if you don't have a video, application on your system, create a Google Meet. It records it. Okay. And do the recording part of it. If you're creating a Google Meet, it should work there. There's several different opportunities to do that. And then send it over to me. Okay. So I want to see it. I want to see where your pain points are and help you, conquer this. And I know that makes a big difference on really understanding a concept. after Tuesday, we're gonna continue going. Error handling's next. I'll do high level error handling. Also, too, we'll dabble into and hit all these other objectives. We're gonna do, like I said, Tuesday's dedicated for you to share a presentation or a recorded presentation, and then the rest of Tuesday, Wednesday is going to also be, the objective. And then we're bumping Thursdays that was originally planned for Thursday. The 8th is going to bump to Friday. Okay. Going to bump to Friday and same time frame. So we will get together on that Friday to complete out and get you ready to sit for the exam. So
Sounds good.
that'll be the 9th. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I've accepted that invitation. It hasn't shown on my calendar, but I don't know if something needs to be checked there, but yeah, I'm good on Friday. That'll be great.
All right. Yeah, I'll check that. I'll check it out. So it should have updated on the calendar. So
No
this is
worries.
a wrap for today. Let me go ahead and stop the record. So thank you. Session again, challenge on. I'll be emailing you some details about that too, just to follow up with it, because I know some of you might not have seen this recording just yet. And what else? Tuesday.
I know what mine is. I know what my weakness is.
What is it? What are you choosing?
Definitely data weave. I need to work on that. I need
Okay.
to get in there and see the expressions better and get it. So that's mine.
Awesome. Awesome.
Pulling
Very
myself
good.
out.
There you go. There you go. Hold you accountable. And like I said, however deep you want to go, I'm fine with that, because what's going to happen is what you share is going to help others too.
Yep.
So if you want to take the full time, I'm all for it. That's all fine with me, because data weave's big. Data weave's big.
Yep.
All right, cool. I'll pause the record. I'm stopping the recording now. So folks, I will see you in session 3, but you should be getting some emails regarding all of these other videos and the challenge. So thank you so much for being with us, and I will see you in the next video.